Part 1 of the story of Ovadiah Hanavi, also known as Ovadiah. Some of the things we're going to cover in this series. Number 1, who was Ovadiah? And why until this very day is his name so popular, especially among Jewish converts? Number 2, what's the backstory behind Ovadiah starting off as such a wealthy man and then falling into such extreme debt? Number 3, the fascinating conversation between Ovadiah and his wife after he had already passed away. And number 4, a very timely topic, what does the book of Ovadiah talk about? And when is his terrifying prophecy supposed to happen?
Welcome to Untold Stories of the Torah, a masterclass in Jewish history, presented by Rabbi Shmuel Aber.
First, about Ovadiah. Ovadiah was an Edomite convert. He was a descendant of Eliphaz Hatimni, and Eliphaz Hatimni was the son of Esav. There's a famous story told about Eliphaz that when after Yaakov had taken the blessings from his brother Esav, Esav was very angry and he told his son, chase after your uncle Yaakov and kill him. Eliphaz chased after Yaakov, and when he reached him, Yaakov told him, why are you killing me? Eliphaz had been raised by his grandfather Yitzchak. He had been taught not to kill, and now he's about to kill him. And he told his uncle, what am I supposed to do? My father instructed me to kill you. What should I do about it? So Yaakov said, a man that loses all his money, it's like he's dead. Take all my money, and that will be like you're fulfilling what your father said. So Eliphaz spared Yaakov's life. He took all Yaakov's money. Yaakov ended up going to Lavan, and Lavan was so confused. Why is it that Yaakov, whose father's so wealthy, is coming empty-handed? But it was all because Eliphaz had taken the money originally. But Eliphaz was a very great man. Eliphaz was one of the 3 friends of Eov. Eov was a righteous man who Hashem tested. Eov failed the test, but he was still a very, very great man. And after the story, Eliphaz actually criticized his friend Eov. After he was beset with tragedies and misfortune, Ovadiah was a descendant from this man. He came from the nation of Edom, and he was a descendant of Eliphaz. Ovadiah lived around the year 3000 of Jewish history, which is about 2,700 years ago, and about 500 years after the Jewish people had arrived in the land of Israel. So they'd already been in the land of Israel 500 years, a nice good of time, and that's when the story of Ovadiah takes place. At a very early point in his life, it seems, he converted and joined the Jewish people. And also from a very young age, he already had a tremendous fear of Hashem. Shmois Rabbah says that Ovadiah was an extremely wealthy man. And he got married, and his wife was also extremely righteous. There's a medrash, it's called Medrash for Isha Achas. And it says like this, that when Hashem created Chava, the very first woman, Hashem looked to her future to see which type of women would come from her. And Hashem saw that there were women from the generations of the flood and generations from the dispersion who would cause their sons to sin. They were very, very wicked women. And then Hashem also looked into Chava's future and saw there'd be very righteous women like Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Additionally, Hashem looked into Chava's future, all the future women that would come from her, and saw there'd be a very wicked queen who we're going to talk about at great length in this podcast, called Queen Izebel, and she was going to be a descendant of Chava. And then Hashem saw that the wife of Ovadiah was also going to come from Chava. And Hashem said it's worth it to create Chava even for one of these future righteous women. So the wife of Ovadiah is one of these very special women who Hashem looked into the future to see that it's worthwhile to create Chava, even though there were going to be many very, very wicked women in history. The wife of Ovadiah somehow was able to outshine them. Ovadiah and his wife had 2 children, boys, and according to the Mamleas, Ovadiah became a student, one of the 4 very famous students of Eliyahu Hanavi, in the company of the other 3 famous students, who was Elisha, the successor of Eliyahu Hanavi, Yoina Hanavi, and also Micha. But the Das Sofrim holds different. The Das Sofrim says that Ovadiah and Eliyahu did not know each other until much later in the story, which we'll cover later on. Now, in order to understand the story of Ovadiah, we really need to understand the backdrop. We need to understand what was going on at the time of Ovadiah in order to truly understand how great Ovadiah really was. And for that, we need to talk about this history of the house of Omri. In the year 2964 of the Jewish calendar, this is after the time of David and after the time of his son Shlomo, King Solomon, the nation of the Jewish people was led by the king Rehoboam, the son of King Shlomo. And the nation was split. There was a civil war. Yericho ben Nevat declared himself the king of the north of Israel. He carved out half of the land of Israel as his kingdom, and he went to war against the south of Israel, against Rehoboam ben Shlomo, the grandson of David HaMelech. It was a very bitter civil war, and the civil war continued beyond Yericho ben Nevat's kingship. His son, Nadav, was king afterwards. Nadav was then assassinated by Baasha, who was then succeeded by his son Elah. Elah was also assassinated, and there was a bit of a power struggle, and then Omri became the king. So King Omri was the third dynasty to rule in the north of Israel. Unlike the south of Israel, which was only led by the house of David HaMelech, the house of King David, the north of Israel was led by families. And these families, usually very, very short reigns, whether it's just one king or two kings, a king and his son, and then they were assassinated and taken over by someone else. But the third dynasty, the third family to take over the north of Israel was King Omri. King Omri ruled in the city of Tirzah for 6 years. That was the capital city at that time. And then King Omri founded a new city, a city which is now extremely famous, but he was the founder of the city of Shomron, which is in English Samaria. And he ruled in that city for the remainder of his life. The verse says very sharply, it says, he behaved evil in the eyes of Hashem and was worse than all the kings of the north until him. So King Omri was very, very wicked. He behaved in a very, very inappropriate way for a king or anyone to behave. And all the earlier kings who themselves were very wicked, King Omri somehow was even worse than them. The Ralbag says that his real criticism, or one of the real criticisms of King Omri, was he should have learned from the earlier two dynasties. The house of King Yeravam and the house of King Baasha, they had not behaved in the correct way. They had been greatly punished, and now it's the third time. He should have learned and stayed loyal to Hashem. And the fact that he didn't was considered a very, very big criticism on King Omri. The Maharsha explains on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, it says, why did King Omri merit the 3 generations of kings? Something that didn't really happen in the dynasties of the north until that point. And the answer that he gives is, he says, because he added a city to the land of Israel, he founded the city of Shomron, he founded the city of Samaria. That was an incredible merit for him. Hashem was very happy that he had founded a new city in the land of Israel. And so Hashem gave him a gift and said, you can have 3 generations of kings coming from you because of your incredible behavior of founding a new city. Even though he behaved very wickedly, he still had some merits. And the Ben Ish Chai writes on this. He says, the real credit to King Omri was that he didn't name the city after himself. Usually when kings and great men want to build something great, whether it's a city or a wall or a castle or a building, whatever it is, they usually name it after themselves. In the case of King Omri, he wanted to add a city to the land of Israel. He did not name it after himself. He didn't call the city after his own name. He called it Shomron. And because he did it, he just added a city and didn't make it about himself. Hashem blessed him to have 3 generations of kings in that merit. Something big changed during the reign of King Omri. The civil war ended. Unlike the earlier kings who were in a civil war against the righteous kings of the south of Israel, King Omri made peace with the south of Israel. King Yehoshaphat, who was a very, very righteous man, he was the great-great-great-grandson of David HaMelech, and King Omri made peace. In fact, they married into each other. In fact, the crown prince of Yehoshaphat, Jehoram, who was, again, also a descendant of King David directly from his father all the way up, got married to Atalia, and Atalia was the daughter of the crown prince Achav. So the king's granddaughter, Atalia, got married to Yehoshaphat's son, the crown prince. When King Omri died, he was taken over by his son, King Achav, and King Achav was a very famous king. King Achav became king and he ruled for 22 years. And unfortunately, the same verse that's said in regards to his father is said about King Achav as well, which only amplifies the verse. It says, King Achav also behaved evil in the eyes of Hashem and was worse than all the kings of the north until him, which meant that King Achav outdid everyone in wickedness, including his own father. King Achav was married to a very, very wicked woman. Her name was Izebel, famously known in English as Jezebel. She was the daughter of Esbaal, the king of Tzidon. And King Achav began to serve the idol worship called Baal. She introduced a tremendous amount of wickedness into the Jewish people in the north. The north had already been sinning, but she amplified it very, very greatly. And she encouraged her husband, King Achav, to do idol worship. King Achav was the king who ruled during the times of Ovadiah. But we're not quite up to the story of Obadiah just yet. Let's talk a little bit more about King Achav. King Achav is described as behaving evil in the eyes of Hashem, but what's very interesting about King Achav, he also had a tremendous amount of merit. It wasn't all just wickedness, although there was a lot of wickedness in the verse. The Psukim talk about King Achav's wickedness. There was also a tremendous amount of goodness in King Achav. And his goodness that he was most famous for was his incredible honor of Torah. He famously was threatened by a king, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram. And Ben-Hadad threatened King Achav, and King Achav actually agreed to the threat and agreed to give his wife and his children, his gold and his silver to Ben-Hadad. And then Ben-Hadad said, I don't just want that, I want the Torah as well. I want you to give me over the Torah. And there's many explanations of what that means. But King Achav said, absolutely not. And he refused. He was willing to give his wife, his children, his gold and his silver away to a foreign king, but he wasn't willing to give the Torah up. And in that merit, the Gemara says, in Gemara Sanhedrin, Yericho says, 22 letters the Torah is made up from, 22 years he was a king for. And then that doesn't sound like a long time. For the kings of the north of Israel, that was a very, very long reign. Additionally, the Gemara says, to Achav's credit, he was very generous with his property, and Torah scholars benefited from his belongings. So although he did tremendous sins, in fact, the Gemara says he would measure his value, how much he weighed every day, and Chiyel, who we'll talk about shortly, one of his officers, would measure him, and they would donate that money daily to idol worship. But even though he did all these sins, he still supported Torah scholars, and he was able to lift up his merits throughout his life, balancing against his wicked behavior to such a degree that at the end of his life, it was equal. He had equal amount of merit and equal amount of sins. Additionally, King Achav himself was an incredibly great Torah scholar. And there's a Rashi in the Gemara Sanhedrin which says every year King Achav would innovate 85 new ideas in Torah from the section of Torah's Kohanim, which is considered the hardest section of the Torah, the Sefer Vayikra. The Gemara says that although King Achav rebelled against Hashem, and there were many other wicked people living during his reign, there were also many very righteous people living during his kingdom as well. So he didn't just have a wicked empire, but there were also many, many righteous people who flourished during his reign. There's a very interesting story in the Gemara, in the Yerushalmi. Rabbi Levi, a famous rabbi, he spent 6 months talking about King Achav. And he spoke about the verse in King Achav, and it goes like this. It says, Rak lo yehoyach Achav asher hismake lasos hara b'nei Hashem. He said the verse, which talks very sharply about King Achav. It says, but there was none the likes of Achav, who sold himself to do evil in the eyes of Hashem. A very sharp criticism of King Achav and his behavior. And for 6 months, this rabbi spoke about King Achav and about how evil and horrible his behavior was. One night he has a dream, the Gemara says. And in the dream, King Achav came to Rabbi Levi in the dream, and he asked him, what sin did I do against you? What did I do before you? Why are you mentioning only the first half of the verse and not the second half? 6 months you're dedicating to just talking negative about me, but you're not quoting the entire verse. Rabbi Levi woke up from the dream and he realized that King Achav was right. And for the next 6 months after that dream, Rabbi Levi explained the second half of the verse. And what was it? The last part of the verse says, Asher heisato oisai izevel ishtoi, which, to read the whole verse in continuity, is, but there was none the likes of Achav, who sold himself to do evil in the eyes of Hashem, whom his wife Izebel misguided. King Achav was telling this rabbi in the dream, you're not really mentioning what caused me to do all this dreadful behavior. My wife Izebel is the one that misguided me. At the time of King Achav's reign, there was a very famous personality. His name was Chiyel. He's also known in Divrei Hayamim as Yechiel. According to the Yerushalmi, he was actually the son of the very righteous King Yehoshaphat, who was the king of the south of Israel. Unfortunately, though, this Chiyel, though his father and his ancestors were so holy and so righteous, Chiyel wasn't behaving that way. Chiyel lived in Beis Kel, and he got it into his mind that he wants to rebuild the city of Yericho, which was actually, interestingly enough, in the section of Binyamin. It's in the southern kingdom. Rebuilding the city of Yericho was an incredible money-making opportunity, and Chiyel was very excited about this. He was an officer for King Achav. Though his father was the king of the south of Israel, there was peace at that time. So he was an officer for the King Achav, and he chose to go in King Achav's way, the wicked way, instead of following like his father in righteousness. That's actually one of the reasons why the building of Yericho, attributed to Chiyel, is also attributed to King Achav, because King Achav was behaving in a really, really wicked way at that time, and King Yehoshaphat was a very, very great and righteous man. The Malbim actually says that Chiyel looked at King Achav, saw all his horrible behavior, and yet no punishment and no consequence for his behavior. And Chiyel thought, well, I have nothing to lose. I may as well build Yericho, even though there's been a dreadful curse on the city to not rebuild it. When Yehoshua conquered the land, Yehoshua started off in the city of Yericho. The city was destroyed, and Yehoshua said, there's a curse on anyone that rebuilds the city. And for hundreds of years, no one had the bravery or the foolishness to rebuild the city. Chiyel, after 500 years, decided, you know what? I'm going to rebuild the city. Very interesting. There's a reincarnation detail that's absolutely fascinating. There's a great Kabbalist, a great scholar all around, called Rameh Mipano. His name is Menachem Azariah of Fano. It's a tremendous story and a tremendous rabbi, and he has a really, really fascinating, unfortunately underlearned book called Gilgulei Neshamis. And in that book, he says that Chiyel was a Gilgul of Achan. Achan was the man who broke the decree of Yeshua from touching the belongings of the city of Yericho. He created a lot of damage. He was killed by Yeshua, but he created a lot of damage by him breaking the decree of Yeshua. And in that same vein, now Chiyel, 500 years later, the same reincarnation of Achan, now rebelled against Yeshua, and he rebuilt the city. He broke Yeshua's curse by rebuilding the city and calling it by the same name. There is an opinion that says possibly he changed the name to Yericho with a hey at the end instead of Yericho, but that still broke the curse. So that little trick didn't work at all. As he started building the city, the verse in Malachim says, his firstborn son Aviram died, and his sons continued to die as he continued building. And his youngest son, whose name was Seguv, he died when he put up the doors of the city. And the verse even says very, very intensely that the punishments that were told by the word of Hashem as spoken to Yeshua ben Nun, he broke it, and he was punished precisely as Yeshua ben Nun prophesied. Now, there's a story in the Yerushalmi in Sanhedrin. It says the following story. It says, Hashem at that time came to Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu Hanavi was the prophet of the time. And Eliyahu Hanavi is going to be a very, very important personality throughout the story of Ovadiah. Hashem comes to Eliyahu Hanavi, and he tells Eliyahu Hanavi, Chiyel is an important man. Go and confront him. Go comfort him. Chiyel, as we mentioned before, was the son of King Yehoshaphat. He was a prince. He was a very, very important person. So Hashem tells Eliyahu Hanavi, go and comfort him. He's in mourning for his youngest son. Eliyahu Hanavi told Hashem, I can't. And Hashem said, why not? And Eliyahu Hanavi said, if I go, they're going to say things that enrage you, and I can't listen to it. I won't be able to bear it. So Hashem told Eliyahu Hanavi, if they say anything that enrages me, anything that you say, I'll fulfill. Whatever punishment you decide, I'll see it through, but you need to go and you need to comfort this person that's in mourning. So Eliyahu Hanavi listened. He went to Chiyel. Achav was there at the time, and while Eliyahu Hanavi was approaching Achav, the king, and Chiyel, his very, very important officer, they're discussing the curse of Yeshua. And the curse is, Cursed be the man before Hashem who would rebuild this town, Yericho. With his firstborn he shall put in the foundation, and with his youngest set the doors. The exact curse that Yeshua had put is precisely what happened to Chiyel. And Eliyahu Hanavi arrives just as they're saying that. Eliyahu Hanavi heard them talking, and Eliyahu announced aloud and said, "Praise be Hashem of the just who fulfills the words of the just." Eliyahu Hanavi is commenting on the fact that Hashem fulfilled the words of Yeshua precisely as Yeshua had predicted it would happen. King Achav asked Eliyahu, as soon as Eliyahu came, he asked Eliyahu, "I have a question for you. Who's greater, Moshe or Yeshua?" It's a very easy question. Moshe is the teacher. Moshe is the greatest prophet of all time. And they answered, Moshe. So Achav said, I have a question for you now. It says in Shema, and the Shema, of course, is written by Moshe, Hishamu lachem pen yifte levavchem. We say it many times per day, and the translation, I'll read the verse in the translation, watch yourself, lest your hearts be seduced. You deviate and you worship other powers and bow down before them. And Achav then asked Eliyahu, and what's written right after this verse about what's the punishment for people that bow down to idols? The charaf, the rage of Hashem will burn against you. He will lock up the sky and there will be no rain. Moshe prophesied that if the Jewish people bow down to idols, Hashem won't bring rain. So King Achav told Eliyahu, I did not leave a single idol worship alone that I haven't worshipped. I've worshipped them all. And yet we have goodness and we have comforting things in our generation. It was a very, very successful generation, which we'll talk about later. Hashem didn't hold up the words of Moshe, and you're telling me that Hashem upheld the words of Yeshua? It was very sarcastic, it was very cynical, and it was very dismissive of Hashem and Moshe. What is actually the answer to that question? That's a great question. Achav was coming from a place of deep cynicism, but what's actually the answer? The answer is Hashem loves the Jewish people, and even though they didn't deserve to have rain, Hashem continued to give rain anyway. But Eliyahu Hanavi, when he heard this very, very dismissive and rude statement of King Achav, Eliyahu Hanavi got upset. And Eliyahu Hanavi said, and this is actually the beginning of chapter 17 of the first book of Malachim, it says, Eliyahu HaTishbiyah of the inhabitants of Gilad said to Achav, as Hashem God of Yisrael lives, before whom I serve, there will be no dew or rain these years except by my word. Eliyahu told King Achav, you're mocking Moshe and you're mocking God. Okay, there will not be rain. You're saying that Moshe's prophecy doesn't happen. I will show you Moshe's prophecy happened. There will be no more rain or dew until I say so. And Hashem then told Eliyahu Hanavi, run for your life, because there's not going to be rain, and Izebel and King Achav are going to want to kill Eliyahu Hanavi as a response to this, what they imagine as a curse from Eliyahu. In fact, it's just Hashem's decree. Eliyahu Hanavi ran away. He went to the valley of Chris, which is near the Yarden, and he was fed by ravens, and he spent some time there. At that time, in addition to chasing Eliyahu Hanavi, Queen Izebel very, very much wanted Eliyahu Hanavi dead, and King Achav also wanted to capture Eliyahu. Queen Izebel started a very intense campaign of hunting down the prophets of Hashem all across the country. And she hunted them down and she killed them. And she was very successful, unfortunately. She managed to find many, many prophets of Hashem and she killed them. It was a very dangerous time to be a prophet of Hashem. Now, at some point after Eliyahu ran away, King Achav starts to intensify the search for Eliyahu Hanavi. And he made a decree. King Achav made a decree to his entire kingdom. He said, anyone that finds Eliyahu should grab him and bring him to the king. And King Achav didn't just stop at searching in his own kingdom. King Achav started searching the entire world. He was so desperate to get his hands on Eliyahu Hanavi, to make Eliyahu Hanavi revoke this curse or revoke this statement that there'll be no rain. He made a search across the world. He started calling kings across the world, making them swear that they don't have Eliyahu Hanavi in their kingdom. The Das Sofrim explains that King Achav searched for Eliyahu because he actually believed Eliyahu had the power to pray on behalf of the Jewish people and end the famine. Although he didn't go about it in the right way, King Achav did search because he did believe. It came from a good place per se. Unfortunately, the way he went about it wasn't the correct way. Now, how could King Achav get foreign kings to swear to him? He's a king in the north of Israel, very, very powerful king, and it's a very successful time. until the famine started intensifying. But how did he get the kings across the world to swear to him that they didn't have Eliyahu in their property? The Gemara says King Achav was one of the rare individuals in history who was a moshel bekippa, which means an actual world leader. He ruled the entire world. The Gemara lists a few people: King Shlomo, for example, Nebuchadnezzar, Achashverosh, Alexander the Great. There were very few people in history who had so much power they actually ruled the entire world. King Achav is in this list. And the Gemara in Megillah, Esther Rabbah, Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, all of them say that King Achav ruled the world, at least for a certain amount of time, and he called every single king in his dominion, and he told them, I want you to swear that Eliyahu Hanavi is not in your kingdom. The Radak, the Rabag, and the Abarbanel most certainly disagree. They say King Achav was not a world ruler. What did he do? He called in favors. He called in not out of fear that he forced the kings to swear. He forced the kings to swear out of love. He said, listen, you like me. We get along. He got along with so many kings across the world. And he said, we're friends. I want you to do me a favor. Swear to me Eliyahu Hanavi is not in your kingdom. Check, make sure, and then come back to me and swear. The Radak even gives a very compelling proof. The Radak says, how could you say that King Achav ruled the whole world when the south of Israel is ruled by another king? King Yericho is ruling in the south of Israel. How can you say that he's ruling the whole world? Even his own land of Israel, he doesn't fully control, only half of it. To say he ruins the whole world is a very big stretch. That's what the Radak says. The Ben Yehoyada asks, why is the Gemara telling us that King Achav ruled the whole world? Who cares? We care about things that are meaningful, but how powerful King Achav has, it's not really that important, and it's not really mentioned in the actual verses itself. Why do we really need to know how powerful King Achav was at some degree of his kingdom? And the Ben Yehoyada, the Ben Ish Chai says, the reason it's important for us to know is King Achav, with all of the misbehavior that he had, honored Torah greatly. And this was a reward for his honoring of the Torah. Therefore, it's very important for us to know that, yes, when someone honors the Torah, they will be rewarded very greatly from Hashem. At some point, Ovadiah was appointed as the chief of King Achav's household. The Das Sofrim actually explains that Queen Izebel only killed prophets of Hashem who were in direct agenda to her spreading of idol worship throughout the kingdom. Any prophet that seemed to be in the way of her trying to influence people to bow down to idols, those are the people she killed. Ovadiah wasn't openly going against her. He was a very righteous man, and everyone knew he was a righteous man, as I'm going to say shortly, but he didn't directly go against her in public, and therefore she accepted him. And he even became promoted within King Achav's household until he was the official ruler of King Achav's household, and he was the one running the affairs. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says that King Achav challenged Ovadiah. Ovadiah was the ruler of his house. He ruled and made sure that everything was in his household was successful. And King Achav asked him, they say about you that you fear Hashem greatly, and we'll talk about that soon, but when Yaakov was in Lavan's house was very successful. And when Yosef was running Paro's household, Paro, the king of Egypt, was very successful. Why is it, if you fear Hashem, that I'm not so successful, and right now we're going through a dreadful famine? And the Gemara actually answers, why was it that King Achav wasn't successful? His house wasn't fit for blessing. His behavior was so horrible that he actually wasn't fit for blessing, and he was actually the one that was in the way of the blessings that Ovadiah could have brought to him. Talking of Ovadiah's fear of Hashem, the verse says about Ovadiah that Ovadiah had a great fear of Hashem. The Gemara says that his fear of Hashem was so great that it was even greater than Avraham Avinu. Avraham also feared Hashem, and yet Ovadiah's fear was even greater than Avram. Hashem says about Avraham, says, for now I know that you fear Hashem. This is what Hashem says to Avraham. But it doesn't use the word ma'od. It just says that Avraham fears Hashem, but not ma'od. But about Ovadiah it says, Ovadiah hayayares Hashem ma'od. Ovadiah had great ma'od fear of Hashem. About that, the Das Sofrim points out, not a single time in the Torah is anybody described as having great fear of Hashem like Ovadiah. Ovadiah was absolutely unique in the way that he feared Hashem to such an incredible degree. Now, to be fair, there is a Marsha which explains difference between Avraham's fear and Ovadiah's fear, and the Marsha gives an explanation that Avram's fear was truly great, but Hashem was talking to Avram directly, and therefore he only said partial praise in front of him. But in the case of Ovadiah, it wasn't in front of him when it was said, and therefore he got his full praise mentioned. But in regards to love, nobody had more love to Hashem than Avram. Of course, Avram is the greatest in that degree. But in fear, what's interesting is Ovadiah's fear of Hashem is only mentioned this way about Ovadiah, not anybody else. Now, Izebel is going around the country killing people, killing prophets of Hashem. Great and holy men are dying because Izebel is sending her soldiers and her officers around the country, killing them. So in addition to Eliyahu Hanavi being hunted, all of these prophets of Hashem were also being hunted. And Ovadiah and his wife, both of them together, they found 100 prophets of Hashem, and they decided they're going to do something about it, and they hid them. They hid them in 2 separate caves, and Ovadiah, using his own resources, his own money, he gave them during a very, very deep famine. The famine's going to go for 3 years. In those days, famines were disastrous. Using his own money, Ovadiah and his wife are going to sustain the prophets with bread and water and even oil for them to study Torah while they're in the cave. 2 separate caves, 50 prophets in one cave and 50 prophets in another cave. And the Targum says, so interestingly, Ovadiah could have justified himself and stole money from the king in order to pay. Ovadiah could have said, the king is unjustly searching and killing prophets across the country. I'm going to sneak his own money, which Ovadiah had access to, and I'll use that to at least be able to pay for the prophets who I'm hiding. Ovadiah said, I want to have nothing to do with thievery. He used his own personal money to support these 100 prophets so they could survive. And the Ben Ish Chai says the reason why it mentions that they're in 2 separate caves is to mention how much extra work that would have been for Ovadiah and his wife to take care of them. And even so, even the fact that he was literally depleting his personal finances, he did it graciously, and he did it in 2 separate locations. Why did he hide them in 2 separate locations? There's a Gemara. The Gemara in Sanhedrin has 2 different rabbis that give different opinions. Rabbi Loza says that Ovadiah learned from Yaakov. When Esav was on his way to attack Yaakov, Yaakov was very concerned about this attack. And so he decided, if Esav attacks one half of my family, I'll be able to put the other half on the side and they'll be able to flee. So Yaakov split his family in half on one side, half on the other side. In case one gets attacked, the other will be able to flee. Rabbi Loza says that Ovadiah learned from Yaakov and said, if King Achav finds half the prophets, at least the other half will be safe. But if they're all in one location, well, then they're all going to be in danger. Rabbi Avahu in the Gemara, though he gives a different, more pragmatic answer. He just says the cave that Ovadiah found could only hold 50 prophets. Okay, so 50 prophets are here and 50 prophets in another one, and that's the reason why they were in 2 separate locations. The Ben Ish Chai on the Gemara in Sanhedrin gives a really beautiful answer. He says Ovadiah split them based on the Ketayos. Every day in the Beis HaMikdash, 100 manna of weight was the weight of the frankincense, was the weight of the Ketayos that was brought to the Beis HaMikdash. 50 was reserved for the morning and 50 for the afternoon. So Ovadiah said, that's a great amount. I could put 50 of the prophets in one location, 50 of the prophets in the other location, just like the way that the Ketayos is brought in the Beis HaMikdash. And the rabbis asked a really interesting question. Why is it mentioned about the bread and the water? And why is it that the water's mentioned, bread's a bigger deal than water? And based on the Eitz Yosef and the Yedei Moshe on the Medrash Rabbah, the explanation is that water during a drought is much harder to come by. That's why we mentioned the water. And additionally, getting water during a drought requires a lot of publicity, and it's dangerous. And it brings a lot of attention. You're getting so much water during a drought, people start wondering, okay, well, what are you using all that water for? Every drop of water is so precious. And what's interesting is, and we're going to talk about this at much greater length later on, nobody informed against Ovadiah. People could have come forth and said, Ovadiah is doing something suspicious. People knew he was hiding prophets, and no one came to King Achav. No one told him, by the way, your highest minister, the one that's running your entire affairs, he's hiding 100 prophets. People knew. It was an open secret, and yet the king and the queen never found out because no one informed on them, which is a tremendous merit, even though there were many people at that time that were behaving in a very, very wicked behavior. It got so bad for Ovadiah that although he was a very wealthy man, he gave every penny away to charity to such a degree that he had nothing left at all. He had nothing left to provide for the prophets in the cave. He spent every single penny he had and was very, very wealthy. He gave it all away just to keep these 100 prophets alive during the famine. And Ovadiah got desperate. He didn't want the prophets to die. He needed more money. So he decided he's going to go to the crown prince, who was the son of King Achav, and secretly borrow money from him. Now, the prince told Ovadiah that if you want the money, not a problem, but I'm going to charge you interest. As we're going to see later on in the story, the crown prince, unfortunately, was not a very righteous man. And so he said, you want money? Sure, I'll give you money, but you're going to pay on top of it. You're going to pay interest. Paying with interest is a massive sin. It's absolutely forbidden to charge interest. And the crown prince said, you want the money? These are my terms. The Radal asks, how could Ovadiah say yes to that? It's an absolute sin, and Ovadiah was a tremendously righteous man. He feared Hashem greatly, as we said before. So how could he have borrowed with interest? The fact that the prince lent with interest, well, that we understand. He wasn't a righteous man, but Ovadiah was, and lending is also a sin as borrowing. Both of them are two parts of a sin. Each one is a sin. It's not just the borrower, it's also the lender. You're never allowed to lend. You're never allowed to take money with interest. And so the Radal, David Luria, he explains, he says, it was life and death. Because it's life and death, a person's allowed to do whatever it takes aside for the 3 commandments, that a person's not allowed to break in life and death. And in this case, Ovadiah was allowed to borrow, even if it meant paying back with interest, because he was saving the lives of 100 prophets. Hashem very badly wanted the famine to be over. The Jewish people were suffering tremendously. The famine had such a toll on the Jewish people, and they were in deep, deep agony and deep, deep pain, and people were suffering, and Hashem wanted it to be over, but Eliyahu Hanavi was not ending the famine. And Eliyahu Hanavi was being provided for by the ravens in the middle of nowhere, and Hashem decided, you know what? Maybe it's time for Eliyahu Hanavi to see the suffering himself, and hopefully when he sees how badly people were suffering, he'll weaken and he'll go to King Achav and end the famine. So Hashem sent Eliyahu Hanavi to the very, very north of Israel, to a city called Sarfas. And over there, Hashem prepared a widow to take care of Eliyahu Hanavi. This widow was the mother of Yericho Hanavi. And this part of the story is mentioned in the 3-part series earlier on the story of Yericho Hanavi. If you're interested to hear more about this part of the story, look up the earlier episodes of my podcast. But moving along, the Radak says that when Eliyahu Hanavi was there, and it's a fascinating story of how he got there and what he did while he was there, when he was there, he was out in the open. And the widow and the rest of the city, no one revealed Eliyahu Hanavi's location to King Achav. There were people that knew about it, and no one actually informed Eliyahu Hanavi. Again, tremendous blessings came to the Jewish people because of their resolve not to inform on each other. And we'll talk about that again later. The young Yoina dies, and Eliyahu Hanavi brings him back to life. And when he does, he trades keys, and he gives up the key of rain. And right after that, Hashem instructs Eliyahu, it's time for you to go to King Achav. The famine has to be over. Now I'm instructing you, you have to go, and you have to tell King Achav that the famine is officially over and the rain's going to come. And it was in the 3rd year of the famine, and Hashem comes to Eliyahu and says, go appear to Achav, and I will send rain upon the face of the earth. The Bible says Hashem wanted to end the famine, and Eliyahu Hanavi didn't. So Hashem didn't want the famine to end until Eliyahu officially declares it. So Hashem said, 3 years of famine, that's enough of a punishment. The 3 dynasties so far that have been sinning, 3 years is enough. Now it's time for Eliyahu Hanavi to go. So Eliyahu Hanavi had to listen. The verse says, Eliyahu travels from Sarfas to Shomron to meet King Achav, and the famine was extreme in Shomron. It was very, very intense. Very interesting, and again, this is a little off topic. Very interesting, the Gemara says the fact that Eliyahu went to the king, later on in history, King Chiyel was going to use this as a proof that when he needed to meet up with the prophet Yeshaya Hanavi, that he expected Yeshaya to come to him. There's a precedent. Eliyahu went to the king, a prophet goes to a king, Yeshaya should come to me, Yeshaya is a prophet and I'm the king. For more about that story, listen to the episode about Yeshaya Hanavi. Meanwhile, King Achav calls Ovadiah and tells Ovadiah, let's go through the land to find the springs of water and all the brooks. Perhaps we'll find some grass and keep the horses and the mules alive, and we won't lose our animals. King Achav was very scared that the famine's so intense, we're going to start losing our animals. And King Achav said to Ovadiah, let's go, let's make a search party, me and you, and we're going to go and find some grass and be able to keep our animals alive. The Malbim explains that humans have free choice. They can be punished and food could be withheld based on their behavior, but animals don't have free choice. So to punish the animals, well, they did nothing wrong. So King Achav wanted to ensure that the animals stayed alive. So when Hashem brings the rain, the humans will be able to also benefit from it. They divided the land between them to pass through it. So they split up. King Achav said, you go this way, I'll go this way. Why should we travel together? We could cover more ground if we split. Achav went on this way alone. Ovadiah went on this way alone. And the Barbanah says that because Ovadiah feared Hashem, it was him alone that merited to find Eliyahu Hanavi first. And the verse continues, as Ovadiah was on his way, behold, Eliyahu Hanavi is coming towards him. He recognized him, he fell on his face, and he said, is that you, my master Eliyahu? Thrilled. Eliyahu Hanavi is finally back 3 years later, and the Agadah Bereshis writes that because Ovadiah had so much respect for Eliyahu, he was granted to have prophecy. The prophecy we're going to talk about later in the story was in the merit of his incredible respect that he had for Eliyahu Hanavi. So Eliyahu Hanavi tells Ovadiah, it's me, Eliyahu. Go tell your master, here is Eliyahu. Go inform your master that I'm here. And Ovadiah got very worried. And Ovadiah says, and I'll read the verse aloud, he says, what have I sinned that you put your servant in the hands of Achav to kill me? As Hashem, your God, lives, there is not a nation or a kingdom to which my master has not sent a search for you, and they have said he is not there, and he made the kingdoms and the nations swear that they did not find you. As we mentioned, King Achav was a world leader, according to the Gemara and the Medrash, and he forced the kings around the world to promise that it was not there. Or, according to Rabag and the Radak and the Abarbanel, they did it out of love for him. Ovadiah continues and says, and now you say to me, go say to your master, here is Eliyahu, and it will be that when I leave, a wind from Hashem will carry you away to where I do not know. Then I will come to tell Achav, and he will not find you, and he will kill me. And your servant feared Hashem since his youth. The Radak and many of the commentators say that it was very common for Eliyahu that a wind of Hashem would pick him up and bring him to another place. And so Ovadiah was worried that Eliyahu would disappear and he would now get very severely punished by King Achav. He would have self-admitted that he had seen Eliyahu and then he hadn't actually brought him in. The Das Seifrim says King Achav had made a command that anyone that finds Eliyahu needs to capture him and bring him to King Achav. If Ovadiah admitted to seeing Eliyahu but returned empty-handed to the king, he'd be killed. Additionally, and this is very, very important, the Das Seifrim says that Ovadiah was starting to sense that King Achav was looking for an excuse to kill him because of his possible connection to the prophets. In other words, King Achav was starting to suspect that Ovadiah was the one responsible for hiding the prophets, and if Ovadiah now let Eliyahu escape, this would now cement King Achav's suspicion about Ovadiah. And so Ovadiah continues in his conversation to Eliyahu Hanavi, and he says, it has been surely told to my master what I did when Izebel killed the prophets of Hashem. I hid 100 of the prophets of Hashem, 50 in a cave, and sustained them with bread and water. And now you say to me, go tell your master, here is Eliyahu, he will certainly kill me. The Metzudas David explains that Ovadiah was telling Eliyahu that if he got killed by King Achav, all the prophets that he was hiding would now die. And Ovadiah was telling Eliyahu, have pity on the prophets. And so Eliyahu assures Ovadiah. And the verse says, and Eliyahu said, as Hashem Tzavakis lives, before whom I have served, today I will appear to him. So Eliyahu assures Ovadiah, you don't have to worry about telling the king that I'm going to appear. I most certainly am going to appear. And you could say it with complete confidence that I actually will come and appear before the king. And in the upcoming class, we'll talk about what actually happened when King Achav and Eliyahu Hanavi actually meet.
Thank you for listening to Untold Stories of the Torah. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing to this channel and leaving us a review.